At the height of the Afghanistan conflict, I would sometimes get asked how many people I'd killed. I always struggled with that question. I have a literal mind sometimes, and part of me would always wonder, well, how do you calculate that? Does it only count if I pull the trigger? Or does it count if I approve a target while in a headquarters far from the battlefield? If you follow that logic far enough, the question can be turned back upon the asker. Soldiers don't find themselves in places where they can kill by their own design. No, something has put them there. Their country, their government, which, after all, is representative of the people, at least in a democracy. So in one sense, it might be me who pulls the trigger. But in another sense, we all pull the trigger. And that is how it should be. Decisions to use force to decide who lives and who dies are among the most serious decisions we can make. They go beyond one person because of the cost both to those who are killed, but also to those who kill. To kill another human being is to stare into an abyss. As Clint Eastwood said in the movie Unforgiven, it's a hell of a thing killing a man. Take away everything he's got and everything he's ever going to have. My profession, the profession of arms, is all about the use of force. That is our area of expertise. My profession is not unfailing, but one thing we do understand is that there are limitations to the use of force. The fog of war is real. First reports are generally wrong, and when we decide to use force, we must purge non-essential information to make the best decision possible in an environment where the most we can probably hope for is controlled chaos. There's a drill we do called a shoot, no shoot exercise. We blindfold somebody, disorient them, then expose them to a situation where they have to make a snap decision. The goal is for them to shoot who needs to be shot and to not shoot those who do not need to be shot. People struggle with sensory overload, distance to targets, number of targets, facial expression, postures. But over time, they learn to parse out non-essential information to make the best, to prioritize the most reliable signs of a threat. What's in somebody's hands? On a collective level, we designate main efforts, supporting efforts, things to prioritize information because priorities, things that are regarded as more important than others, guide our decisions. But it's easy to lose sight of priorities, isn't it? I decided to join the military not because I wanted to serve my country, but because I wanted a paid education. That was my priority. My family wasn't poor, but nor did we have a money tree, and the world was pretty safe in the mid-90s. It was years before a group of men would crash planes into the World Trade Center in the Pentagon. A few years later, in 2002, I found myself in Afghanistan with a whole new set of priorities. Defeating the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, getting everybody in my platoon home alive. On April 17th of that year, we were doing a night firing exercise. It was a wonderful night, the kind that never makes it into war movies. The sky was clear, and I was in the company of soldiers who were more like family than colleagues. We'd eaten together, stood guard together, showered together. We'd even burned our shit together. At one point that night, I stopped to talk to another soldier, both of us unaware that 2 F-16 fighter jets were flying overhead. Also unaware that one of the pilots had assessed our training activity as enemy surface-to-air fire and thus a threat. And equally unaware that even at that moment, a 500-pound bomb was hurtling towards a point on the Earth's surface less than a few hundred meters from where we stood. Tim O'Brien once wrote that, in many ways, a true war story cannot be believed. You see, often the actual events are so implausible that the storyteller has to invent a series of escalating normal events so that the crazy stuff is more believable. In this case, what's crazy about a 500-pound bomb being dropped on a 100-person infantry company isn't that so many people were killed and wounded, but so few. But violence is fickle. It can be a sword that cuts both ways. After the bombing, there were many who wanted the heads of those pilots, understandably. On the one hand, it was a tragic event, a dereliction of duty that resulted in 4 heartbreaking funerals. On the other hand, it was a mistake. And if you think about it, mistakes happen in the workplace all the time. But when the tools of your profession are designed to kill, mistakes can be unforgiving. This is the thing I think many people don't appreciate about violence. It's why many professional martial artists might say that the best outcome of a violent encounter isn't to win, it's to walk away unharmed. to survive. Because at a certain point, all bets are off. Like the character Hoot says in the movie Black Hawk Down, you can't control who gets hit or who doesn't. It ain't up to you. It's just war. But decisions have consequences. The consequence of a pilot deciding to bomb an infantry company was that 4 good men died. More were wounded, and many more decided to live their lives to make sure that those lives weren't in vain. For right or wrong, priorities changed. And not only do decisions have consequences, but there are unique costs to the use of violence. In 2011, I was back in Afghanistan for my 5th tour, in charge of a unit. One day, there was a prison break. Hundreds of Taliban prisoners escaped. We sent out teams to help recapture them, and they found themselves in a local village. While they were there, a stray dog attacked. It was thin, mangy, very possibly diseased. The soldiers tried to shoo it away, and it wouldn't go. And at a certain point, one of the soldiers decided to fire a warning shot. Well, the bullet ricocheted and hit a cow, wounding it bad enough that it had to be euthanized. The cow was pregnant, and before it died, it gave birth to a premature calf, which died also. And so it goes, as Kurt Vonnegut might say. I wasn't there when any of this happened, not that it would have mattered. I was responsible. I went to meet the village elders to work out reparations, and I had all the answers. Our mission was just. We were supporting the rule of law, providing security so that development could take place, and yes, it was tragic that the cow had died, but that had not been our intent. And at any rate, I was there to set things right. Well, the elders told me a story of their own. They said that in the battle between bulls, it's the sheep who get trampled. I asked my interpreter about that later on. I asked him if he thought there had been any Taliban in that village. And he said, if there weren't before, there are now. If I can tell you one thing from a lifetime of studying violence, it's that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had it right. Violence begets violence. Every instance of violence bursts the seeds of new conflict, and it would be one thing if those consequences were limited to the first order, but they're not. No, there are often second and third order effects, many of which are difficult to predict. Like this one. Several years ago, I had a wonderful routine with my daughter, who was 4. Weekend mornings, we'd get up early, go to the basement. She'd watch cartoons, and I'd train martial arts. But one morning, we go downstairs, and I stopped to get her a snack. I'm tired. We have a newborn who'd been up all night, and as I'm getting a bowl of strawberries, my daughter asks, Daddy, is it okay for good people to do bad things to bad people? Now, I hear the question, and I have no idea where it came from. I'm tired, it's early. And I just want to get my daughter in front of the television for a few minutes just so I can wake up. But she's asked it as only a 4-year-old can, equal parts innocence and honesty. And my profession is, well, it's all about the use of force. It's all about doing bad things to bad people. And it strikes me that if I can't explain this to a 4-year-old, then maybe I don't deserve the rank on my uniform. So I kneel down and I look her in the eyes. And the whole time the gears are cranking. I'm thinking up a vanilla response, but I'm also thinking that I have 2 young daughters who I want to be 10 times stronger than I could ever be. Because in the real world, there are predators. No, danger does not lurk around every corner, but it does have a way of finding us, especially when we're least prepared. So I say, sweetie, sometimes we have to do bad things to people to stop them from doing even worse things to us. But that doesn't mean it's okay to hurt people. Because when we hurt someone else, we also hurt ourselves. If I'd been more thoughtful, I might have said, any man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. But as I said, it was early. As it was, her eyes rolled up in her head, and I remember thinking that I had utterly blown it. But after a few seconds, she said, okay, and she asked me for a strawberry. I said, sure, sweetie. And I picked her up, and we went downstairs. So I'm sitting beside her on the couch, and I can't stop thinking about this. She's moved on long ago. She's worried about who do you ask for help when you don't know where to go, and I'm thinking about her question and my response, and I realize I've missed half her life to this point. I've been busy playing army, and I could easily have missed this too, yet another consequence. And then who would have explained it to her? Who would have explained how we as a society justify the use of violence, of killing somebody. And it's important, because killing is wrong. Whether in service to your country or as a crime of passion, whatever the context, it is wrong. Now, that is not to say that violence and killing aren't sometimes necessary, because there are times when they absolutely are. There are people in this world who mean to do harm to others. And so we may at times have to harden our hearts and cause harm in order to prevent or stop even greater harm. And while our hearts must be immovable, made of steel that gives us the resilience to endure and commit acts that we know are wrong, they must also be supple enough to preserve our humanity. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? But if violence is wrong, if killing is wrong, and we as a society continue to put people into harm's way with the expectation that they will kill on our behalf if necessary, what kind of position do we put them in? An impossible one? How do we prepare? Militaries are good at conditioning people to overcome their resistance to killing, partly through training, but also partly through diffusion of responsibility, as in it's not just them pulling the trigger. But if we all share a portion of the responsibility for state-sanctioned violence, then what does society do to prepare itself for the cost of violence done on its behalf? This is not a new question. Rosa Brooks, in her book, How Everything Became War, documents just a few of the examples of how ancient civilizations prepared their warriors and their broader civilization for combat. Even as late as the Second World War, forces marched off to war and society turned out to watch, not because everyone loves a parade. We don't. No, it's because these are societal symbols of collective responsibility, collective accountability, affirmations that when that sister, brother, son, or daughter must look down the sights of their rifle and decide who lives and who dies, they do not stand alone. No, they stand with the weight of a nation behind them. Richard Holmes wrote that societies which ask soldiers to fight on their behalf should be aware of what the consequences of their actions may so easily be. And since we know there are consequences, and since we know that the unique cost of violence is more violence, we know the effects touch everything from the policy goal being sought to the reintegration of service members into society. For there are limitations to what military force can accomplish. Witness the conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. There will be a result. But any decision achieved primarily through military force is not likely to be absolute, because it is a means to an end. It is a tool to accomplish an objective that a society wants bad enough that it is willing to kill to get it. But how can those decisions be made if the society doesn't understand the costs involved? Consider the reintegration of service members. Study after study has shown that the nature of social support can mitigate the effects of exposure to combat. And by social support, I'm not talking about military appreciation nights or military discounts, which, by the way, are all great, and veterans appreciate them. But what I'm talking about is the social support as the understanding from a society that what those people did was necessary, that there was a difficult job to be done, and that society as a whole stood up and said, for right or wrong, we asked you to kill on our behalf. And in doing so, we understood that you yourself might have had to die. We understand and we appreciate it. Because in this case, it is the soldier who provides the hardened shell of society's immovable heart, doing what is necessary to survive, complemented with humanity's compassion and understanding. Is it possible that if society better understood the cost of violence, that more thought and care might go into these decisions? If that was the case, could we make more progress? Because there must be something else to look forward to than perpetual war and conflict. We talk about costs. What's the opportunity cost of the money spent globally on defense? I met a soldier once on his 6th deployment, and he told me that he would be willing to go to war 20 times if it meant his children wouldn't have to. Having tried to explain violence to my own children, I understand how he felt. I too would go to war 20 times, 100 times, if I thought it would spare my children having to stare into the abyss of killing another human being. But for the life of me, I cannot see an end in sight. The military part of me accepts that violence and war have been part of our history almost forever, and that's not likely to change. But when I think about the money spent on defense, on security, on better ways to track and surveil and destroy, I despair of our dwindling opportunities to address other complex challenges. How will we tackle issues like climate change, artificial intelligence, drug-resistant bacteria, if we cannot stop killing each other? I don't have the answer for that. All I am is a simple soldier, a grunt. And violence is bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us here. I'm a student and will never be a master, but I know enough to tell you that to use violence against another human being is to flirt with disaster. It is to fight with monsters. There's a scene in the movie True Romance where a hitman is describing what it's like to kill somebody. He says, now the first time you kill somebody, that's the hardest. The second one ain't no Mardi Gras either, but it's better than the first. You still feel the same thing, but it's better. Then the third one's easy. You level right off. Now I do it just to watch their expression change. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the thing about monsters is they fight back. And just as individuals who fight with monsters must guard against becoming one themselves, so too do societies. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? Thank you.